Hi, I'm Baldur Brönnimann, and this is the Conducting Coaching podcast, where we talk about conducting from the inside. And today on the Conducting podcast, we'll talk about something that we've probably all experienced at some stage. You step off the podium after a rehearsal and think, I didn't really achieve what I wanted to achieve today. I couldn't take people to where I wanted to take them to. Or maybe you felt you just didn't connect. This can be down to many things, but maybe you just weren't persuasive enough. You didn't get through. Persuasion has to do with convincing people, with being inspiring, or simply knowing what you're talking about. But let's just have a closer look at how this all works and how you can work on your persuasion skills. The first point about persuasion is you have to know who you're talking to. This is much easier, of course, if you work with a group on a regular basis. You will know them much better. But if you work with an orchestra or a choir for the first time, ideally you have to know what sort of communication they use. You know their rehearsal speech, how they talk to each other when they're making music. Also how they talk to a conductor and what sort of communication they expect from a conductor. Sometimes there are small differences even between sections and so on. There are just different dynamics in every orchestra. Even their non-verbal language might be different. And there are cultural differences, of course. Orchestras in Latin America as a whole speak very differently in rehearsals and to each other than an orchestra in Scandinavia, for example. But you as a conductor have to find out about this. Because the better you can get into their frequency and talk in their own language they use, the better you will be perceived and get through. And I'm not talking Russian or French or English. I mean their way of talking in a rehearsal. If you can't prepare, you just simply have to read the room. To step up on the podium and to immediately feel what the vibe is of a collective, this for me is a key quality of a conductor. Some people are naturally better at this than others, but you can work on it. Reading a room will also improve over time. The second point is, you have to know the situation you're in. So for example, if somebody just booked you for a family concert or an orchestra booked you for a pops concert, you're a young conductor and you maybe just have one or two rehearsals, that might not be the moment where you use your most profound insight about the interpretation of a piece. And even if your ideas are really magical, inspirational and personal, people might not value them in the same way because that's just not the situation for that sort of approach. This situation is geared to another type of communication, which doesn't mean that you have to be profane, but you have to communicate in relation to the situation you're in. And if you can do that, people will appreciate it, and again, it will help you to get through better. On the other side, maybe if you conduct a youth or a school orchestra, people will appreciate great concepts, great ideas, something that goes beyond the pure learning of the notes and so on, because people are there to learn. Also, if you work with amateurs and the musicians are there to have a good time and to learn new things, that's a good place to land really big ideas. Just you have to consider exactly where you are and what is expected of you. The third point is you'll have to connect, emotionally and professionally. This is sometimes not so easy because you're nervous in a rehearsal and you come in and you have lots of thoughts, you're insecure maybe about how to find the right tone and so on. It's very, very important to steady your nerves and register the people around you. Look at the musicians when you conduct, feel their breath and their body language and connect to that. Connection will work the better, the quicker you establish it. So if you can do that right in the first moments of a rehearsal, that's a great start, and then you can build on that. My next tip would be to use non-verbal communication. And I don't mean this just when you're conducting, I mean this all the time. So when you're explaining something or when you're just simply turning a page and so on, your non-verbal communication is always important. Non-verbal communication is instinctive. You know, before kids can talk, they already send and understand non-verbal signals. It is one of the first types of communication we learn. So this is a really primal language that is deeply ingrained in us. Just think about the people you have around and who you know really well, like your parents or your kids, your partners and so on. You can sometimes see what goes through their minds or know how they feel by simply looking at them, because you can instinctively read these fine signals that they're sending out. And all of us are trained in that sort of language. There is like an unspoken connection we have to others. Sometimes you don't even have to do something. It is enough to feel something to make yourselves understood, because of this emotional connection we have to others. Actors do this, and you as conductors have to use this kind of emotional transmission in a conscious way. What really convinces is something called congruent information. That is when your verbal and your non-verbal information go in the same direction. This is something you should practice, because sometimes I see people conducting in quite an expressive way, but when they start talking and explaining, all this expressiveness goes away. So make sure you use non-verbal communication always, and you practice your transparency and your expressiveness. Next up is something that every musician would totally agree on, which is to be brief and concise. Never use more words than necessary. Sometimes a suggestion or simply a thought is enough, not even words. Some things you don't even have to say, you just have to feel them, and as I said before, this feeling will transmit if your body language is active and transparent. Talking is an emergency measure in a rehearsal, but if you talk, then make sure your points are brief and exact. Sometimes this means you have to think for a second and just give you a certain pause to getting things formulated in exactly the right way. But make sure your information is precise and short. Now the next point is maybe the most important one. You have to be authentic and genuine in order to persuade. Sometimes this is not so obvious because one can be nervous, one can get distracted. After all, you're in front of a lot of people and it's not so easy to be completely yourselves, especially if you're young or if you want to make a good impression. But the most important thing here is you have to know yourself. You have to know who you are, and your communication, the way you're talking and the way you're conducting, has to be in relation to yourself. That means you can't just copy other conductors or see other people you maybe admire or so. Your communication has to work for you, and your ideas and beliefs have to be your own. And when you're really genuine, people will go along with you on your journey. This also means, of course, that you have to know your stuff, because conviction comes from knowing. You have to know the score. You have to know exactly what you just heard. You have to be in the moment to engage with the sound and with the people you have in front. And you have to have a really deep-rooted knowledge of who you are and what you're talking about. And when you're nervous, you can build on that inner security. It's important that whatever you do, you use the first moments when you get in contact with an orchestra. There's research that says that the first 7 seconds is the time when people make their mind up about you and they sort of find out who you are and if they want to go along with you. This is like super speed dating. You have to use these first 7 seconds. It means you have to prepare for that moment, you have to visualize, you have to be sort of clear inside and aware of what's happening around you. Not being artificially friendly or authoritarian or none of that, but simply being in the moment, being engaged, not distracted, and just enjoying the fact that you can lead a group of musicians and make music together. When you're rehearsing, try and give tangible information. With tangible, I mean something that relates to the reality of the musicians. Try and see the rehearsal from the musician's point of view, in a sense that it's often no use to say something completely conceptual, or that people just can't apply to the music they have in front, or something that is too abstract. For example, maybe the analysis of a piece, or some story that has no relation, especially when you first get to know a piece. Try and be direct and get in touch with the kind of thinking that goes on in players' minds. For me, for example, it's sometimes useful to look at parts beforehand because you can just get a bit of a drift of what went on before, what people worked on when they rehearsed a piece, and so on. And it also sometimes gives small insights into players' minds, and it gives you a perspective of how they see a piece. So make sure you get in there and deliver your information to as close to the player's experience and their imagination as possible. Then be patient. New ideas often take a while to settle in. So don't expect everybody just to go along with you from the first moment. You have to give things time. And sometimes that means letting people process your ideas first. Make sure you have your inner conviction and let people feel that you have strong ideas that are worth going with, and your authenticity and your being genuine will help you to get them along. The last point would be the 3 points of Aristotle, which is logos, pathos, and ethos. These are the 3 pillars of persuasion, and I think this is really quite useful for us conductors. Logos is the intellectual part, your preparation, your analysis, and the structure of your rehearsal, your plan to get from A to B, but also your technical and instrumental knowledge. Pathos means the emotional side. Your information has to be charged with your personality and your conviction, your emotion. People have to feel the sound coming out of you and the weight of your conviction behind the things you do and say. The last part is ethos, meaning don't fake it. Your information has to be grounded on solid knowledge. It also means don't be an idiot. You're there for the group and not for yourself. So make sure you take responsibility for your position, for the music, and for the collective. Thanks for listening. To send us your comments or suggestions, please write us a message on Instagram. And don't forget to subscribe to our newsletter to stay up to date with all the conducting coaching news and events.